Now that we have that web server set up, let's go and set up an FTP server. I'm going to go back to my other workstation, the one with the green screen where we set up the web server. And now I want to turn on an FTP service. I want an FTP server running on this machine. Well, like I said, Windows does have that one that's built in that we can turn on. It requires an inordinate amount of configuration, at least from my perspective. There could be others of you that completely disagree with me, and I support you 100%. If you know how to use that Windows FTP server, outstanding. My preference is to download something a little bit simpler. I do like FileZilla. So I'm going to go to Google, and right now I do have this machine connected to the public internet, and I'm going to do a search for download FileZilla. FileZilla is a FTP server and FTP client software. So we'll go to the downloads page of FileZilla. We have two options here. We can download the server or we can download the client. I don't want the client, I just want the server. So we'll download that server file. Once the server file is downloaded here, we can close our browser window. I'm going to open up my File Explorer, go to Downloads, and just double click on my FileZilla installation here. Effectively, we're going to click Next, 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 Finish. We're just going to leave everything at the defaults. The screen is asking you to choose a port for the administrator interface. Just leave it at the default. It's going to ask you if you want to start the server after setup completes. Do that as well. Hit close. I really just kept everything at the default settings. When I am done, it pops up with my administrator interface and it says, hey, do you want to log in here? I didn't even set a password, so all I have to do is say connect here, and it connects me to my FTP server administration console. I'm running pure FTP here. I'm not doing any kind of encryption, which means that any transactions we do back and forth with this FTP server are going to be clearly visible on our network. For our demonstration purposes, that's not a problem. But when you're in a production network and you have an FTP server set up, you probably want to do an SFTP server so that usernames and passwords are encrypted and that the traffic that you're sending, the files that you're sending back and forth, are also encrypted. For the time being, let's take a look at how FTP is going to operate here. I need to do a couple things. First off, what I want to do is I need to set up a folder on my FTP server that can host the files that I want to transfer on and off of this device. So what I'll do is I'll go into the Documents folder. I've already put a file in here. It's this purple safe. And I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it FTP. And that's going to be the folder I use to transfer files in and out of this server. I'm going to move my purple safe into that FTP folder. So now I have a place on my workstation to do some business with FTP. Let's go back to my server. What I need to do on my server is a few things. They're actually pretty simple. It's just a matter of setting up a user account. So I click on this icon here. It looks like a profile of a human face in front of a computer. And it's going to ask me to create a user here. So I'm just going to click Add. I'll call my username Ross. I'll create a password too. I'm just going to make the password password. I can add this to groups and whatnot, but for the time being, I want to keep this as simple as possible. We're going to take a look at FTP servers, not intimate FileZilla configuration. Before I finish this, I need to add a folder that the username Ross can access, and that's going to be that FTP folder I created. So I'll click Add here. We'll go to my Documents folder and then select FTP and hit OK. And for this user right now, it has permissions to read the files in that folder, but that's it. So what I'm going to allow this user to do is I'm going to allow the user to write files as well, and we'll leave it at that. We hit OK here. Now I have set up my FTP server. I have this file in there called Safe Purple. Before we go back to the other device, let's take a look in my command prompt at netstat again, netstat-ano. And what we should find this time is I should be listening on both port 80 and port 21. So if I look now I do have a TCP port where I'm listening on port 21, that's FTP. And I also have a TCP port 80 where I'm listening for web traffic. Let's move back over to my other workstation and transfer that purple safe file from my FTP server here over to the client. I can have lots of FTP clients. We saw that I can go out and connect to FileZilla and actually download FileZilla's FTP client. That's a nice graphical user interface for us to use. The other option is to simply use the command prompt. Windows by default, Windows 10 at least by default, has an FTP client built in and turned on by default. The way we use it is you type in the command FTP, and then you type the address of the FTP server. In this case, 10.0.0.80. When I do that, it pops up and it says, hey, I want to build a connection here. What's your username? Type in my username and password. And now I'm logged on to that FTP server. I can type dir, and it'll give me a directory listing of the files that are in the directory on the FTP server. Here's that file that's on my server, the safe purple. Let's move that safe purple over to my documents folder. So to do that, I use the command get. So I type get, and I hit enter. And then it says, what's the remote file name? Well, I'm going to select safe purple here, PNG, copy it, and then I can paste it down under remote file and hit enter. And it's going to say, what's the local file? What do we want to call the file, and where do we want to put it on our local workstation? So what I can do there is if I open up a File Explorer window, I'm going to put this in my Documents folder. And if I want to get the file path correct for my Documents folder, I can either type it in here into my window in the command prompt, or the neat part here is I can actually just drag the Documents folder here onto my command prompt, and it actually fills in the file path for me. This makes it much easier to type in because I can never remember which part goes first in my command structure there. So I have c:\users ROS documents, and we'll call this again safe_purple.png. We'll hit enter. It tells me that it successfully transferred that data. If I go look at my documents folder now, there is that purple safe that I transferred from the other machine. In the same way that I brought this safe purple file from my server over to the client, what I can do in the client is I actually can take a file from my client and send it to the server. So let's do that quickly. I'm going to create a new file here, and it's just going to be a text document. We'll call it demo FTP. And we'll open up that demo FTP, and we'll just fill it up with some characters. This is a test. Ross created it. All right, just so that we can verify this document is the same on both sides after we transfer it. We'll close that and save it. We'll go back to our FTP window here, and we can say put. And now it's going to say, what's the local file? I can come over to my Windows Explorer here, or my File Explorer, drag my demo FTP file right onto the command prompt, and it'll fill in all the text for me. The remote file, we'll just call it demo ftp.txt and hit enter, and it successfully transferred it. Let's go over to the server and see if it's over there. I'm back on my server here. Let me close out of this command prompt. And if I look in my FTP folder, right next to Safe Purple is now that demo FTP file. I open it up, and here's that information that I created in that demo text file. My FTP server is keeping a log of everything that happened. It's keeping a track of what IP addresses, the usernames that have connected, what files have been transferred, etc. So this is how we get a server, both FTP and HTTP, set up on a Windows machine. These are very valuable when you're doing testing and setting up labs on your network. The FTP server can be invaluable for users, especially if you have some just basic documentation that doesn't require any kind of encryption, information that isn't sensitive that you can put up online. Let's move on to the next part of the demonstration.